I swear I felt like I was losing brain cells reading this book. Hey Chickadees! Today I'm going to be reviewing the book called Hello Stranger by Katherine Center. So according to Goodreads, this book is about an artist who loses her ability to see faces and the two men she is torn between. Sadie is a portrait artist who just learned she is a finalist in a prestigious art competition. She is flying high until she experiences a medical issue that requires her to undergo a brain surgery. Before we get into the story, I would like to talk about the few positives I liked in this book. For one, I like the representation of prosopagnosia, also known as face blindness. Two, I thought the book was quite entertaining, even though it turned out to be a shit show in the end, but we'll get to that later. And finally, I liked Sadie's and Joe's dynamic, but as friends. So before we get into the meat of the story, I have to tell you about the main characters. Sadie Montgomery is our main character. She's the portrait artist that gets acquired face blindness. Her love interests are known as Joe and Dr. Oliver Addison. Joe is kind of this hipster, secretive guy that Sadie doesn't like at first, but eventually they become friends and eventual love interests. And Dr. Oliver Addison is a veterinarian that Sadie meets through certain circumstances that happen later in the book. Sue Kim is Sadie's best friend. She's a ride or die. She has a little bit of a bigger role that we'll get to later. Sadie's family, she has her dad, who is a renowned surgeon, but we don't really get to see him that much in the book. She has her stepmother, Lucinda, who Sadie says she's overbearing and emotionally manipulative, but to me, she's kind of just a dunce of a stepmother. Finally, we have Parker, which is Sadie's bitchy, evil stepsister, as she calls her. Sadie also has a pet dog named Peanut, which plays a bit of a minor role in the story later. We also have Dr. Nicole, who is Sadie's doctor that helps her through recovery, and she kind of acts like a bit of a therapist sometimes. And finally, we have Mr. Kim, who is Sue's dad and also Sadie's landlord. So now that we know our main characters, let's get into the meat of the story. Spoiler warning, obviously, for the whole story. So how this book starts is that we realize that Sadie has family issues. They don't encourage her artistic dreams, kind of rightfully so, because after all these years of trying to prove them wrong, she still has nothing to show for it. Until she gets in the top 10 spot in the North American Portrait Society. And her best friend Sue wants to celebrate, so she tells her to go out and get wine at a local grocery store. And as she tries to purchase her wine, she realizes she forgot her wallet at her apartment. So as she was about to leave, someone that she deemed a good Samaritan decides to step in and pay for her drink. And they banter a little bit back and forth as she's crossing the street, but then all of a sudden she just stops and everything goes black. So the next thing she knows is that Sadie's waking up in a hospital bed with Lucinda at her bedside. And then right away in our introduction to Lucinda, Sadie's already like, oh, I don't like her. She's just so annoying. But anyways, the only really annoying thing is that she got a call from Parker on FaceTime, and then she showed her Sadie on the bed, and then Parker kind of just made fun of her. The reason why she fainted is that apparently she got a seizure, but we don't know quite yet until her doctor, Dr. Estrella, tells her that she has a leaking cavernoma or something that needs to be surgically removed, but Sadie decides to hold it off for a bit because she needs to still paint a portrait for the competition, and she can't do it right away because it's in 2 weeks or so. So then after a few nights or so in the hospital, she finally gets to go home to her little hovel with her old dog Peanut, which used to be her mom's dog before she died. And then she also mentions that she died the same year, but we don't know exactly what date she did. Just as she was getting settled, her dad called her because something urgent came up. And because her apartment is a mess, she decides to take the elevator down to meet him in the garage or whatever. And in the elevator, she meets this guy named Joe. Well, not really meets, but she's kind of just standing in the back and she's just viewing the back of his head as he's talking really loudly on his phone about what appears to be a big woman he had a one-night stand with, because he keeps saying stuff like, oh my gosh, she's so fat. Her whole side of the bed was sagging. Another one-night stand, big mistake. She shredded the sheets, those nails. Not even kidding, I might need stitches. And then it ends with, yeah, I got home from work and she's still in the bed. So now it's a 2-night stand. And last night, she did that thing where she planched her fat ass right in the middle of the mattress, and then she rolled on top of my face. I almost suffocated, I swear, under a mountain of blubber. And Sadie's just kind of taken aback and just why? Why is he talking about a woman like this? This is so wrong. But she doesn't actually confront him. She just leaves once the elevator doors open to meet her dad. And the reason why her dad wanted to meet her is to advise her to do the surgery on Wednesday, because apparently her mom had the same exact thing, but she didn't get it, which caused her eventual death. So
Just by the tree. Okay.
So then fast forward to Wednesday, she meets Dr. Nicole, she describes as very motherly, very confident. And then her dad performs surgery, yada yada, because he's a famous surgeon. And after the surgery, when she's in her hospital bed, Sue comes to visit, but Sadie realizes she doesn't recognize her at first until she brings up her boyfriend, Whit. Well, Sue's boyfriend, Whit. And then she's like, oh yeah, you're my friend. And then she was just like, but why couldn't I recognize you? That's weird. So she took an MRI, and apparently they found a swelling near her facial recognition area. Now she has temporary acquired prosopagnosia, or face blindness. After a few nights in the hospital, she decided to just stay home for a while to cope with her new condition, because I did feel kind of bad for her because she is a portrait artist and her main source of income is painting portraits, and she also has her art competition that she's competing for. But then she finally decides to go out, and she left Peanut at a vet while she recovered. As she was about to pay for the bill, she realized Lucinda already paid for it. She called her a menace. She literally said when she got the bill back, she looked at it and she's like, oh, what a menace. And I'm like, for what? For paying for something that you can't even afford? To the bill, she says, what a menace. That said, it was also $600 I didn't have, so I wasn't complaining. Could Lucinda just buy my affection like that? Today she could, I guess. I'm just like, why are you so ungrateful for her? Like, she paid your bill, and she knew you couldn't afford it, so I don't know why she's complaining. But anyway, this is where we get introduced to our other love interest, Dr. Addison, which she describes as a tall, white-coated, tie-wearing vet with an up-and-back Ivy League haircut, just standing there generating handsomeness like a sexy living light-up statue. And she's just instantly infatuated with him. She's just fantasizing about their future. If she would change her last name like that for after they were married. And then on the way home, as she's just fantasizing and just having these daydreams, she runs into this lady who knows her full name. She's just like, Sadie Montgomery? And then she just treats her like a stranger because she doesn't know exactly who she is. Until it's revealed that it's Parker just trying to fuck with her. She's just like, oh, I know you can't see me because you would never treat me like this. And then she just walks away. And to end the night, she calls up Sue, who agrees to become her model for the portrait competition. And then as she's calling her, she says, don't flake out, okay? I really need you. And Sue's like, I never flake out, which is important for later, so keep that in mind. But after many attempts of Sadie trying to paint her, as she usually does, it just gets worse and worse, but Sue just keeps encouraging her to try it anyway. That's how the night ends. So the next day, she checks in with Dr. Nicole about her progress on her prosopagnosia. And it kind of sounds like more of a therapy session. I don't know exactly what kind of qualifications Dr. Nicole has. It doesn't say really, but she's just asking her these questions like a therapist would. Like, oh, what's your dream? What do you want for your career? What does your life want to look like? Sadie's like, oh yeah, I want to be out there. I want to be well known. And then eventually it spirals into asking her why she doesn't want to tell people about her condition. She says, what if you just told people about what you're dealing with right now? And Sadie responds with, the whole world doesn't need to know I'm malfunctioning. I get not trusting some people, like Parker especially, because she's just going to shove it in your face. Just other people you're close to about your condition. You don't have to hide it, because that's just going to lead to misunderstanding for later, which does. And it makes me upset. But yeah, yada yada, this whole thing goes on, and she's just like, you know what, I think I'm just gonna fake it till I make it. You know what I mean? And she just doesn't believe in asking for help, which, again, is gonna lead to misunderstanding later, but we'll get to that. So then the next morning, Sadie realizes her dog isn't eating, so she decides to take him to Addison's clinic. And then... Okay, here's the first kicker. So she goes in her pajamas, she rushes over there crying and saying, oh, help him, and stuff like that. They find that something about his red blood cells, his red blood cells are attacking each other or something, or his immune system isn't working. But he should be okay after they look at him for a couple days. But then he asks her, well, once you get him eating, can you tell me his favorite foods? She says, I sat up straighter and pawned at my eyes, determined to pull it together. Yes, he loves tortillas, donuts, rigatoni. He's a big fan of san paneer. He goes crazy for California rolls. He also loves crepes, but only like the kind you get in Paris. If they're too pancakey, that's a no. Dr. Addison tilted his head. I was thinking more like dog food. He's not really a dog food guy, I say. Your dog doesn't eat dog food? I mean, it'll do in a pinch, but if you're asking me what he likes, all those carbs can't be healthy for him. I've heard this before, and I'd defend my little guy before too. He's a foodie, I say. He has a very refined palate. Like, come on, are you serious? Dog owning 101. You can't give a dog human food, no matter what the cartoons tell you. You can't give a dog human food. It's not good for them. And then it just says, Dr. Addison took that in. And then a little joke I made many times, she popped into my head. And I just said it now without really stopping to wonder if, in our current situation, it was still true. You know, those old guys who smoke a pack a day but live to be 100? Yeah. He's kind of like that, but with croissants. Like, I should have stopped reading after that, but I kept going because it was kind of, okay, it was funny and ridiculous, so I just wanted to see how far it would go. But, yeah, I don't know. So then a couple days later, she comes back to the clinic and realizes Peanut's okay. But this bitch, she comes in with a box of pad thai. She says chicken pad thai because Addison says, oh, he needs to eat something with me. And she's like, yeah, I got chicken pad thai here. And then, he actually allows him to continue eating human food right in front of him, right in his clinic. I just can't believe it. He says he really does like pad thai. I'm telling you, he's a very worldly dog, gastronomically. And then the chapter ends with him just casually asking Sadie out on a date, which I'm just like, okay. So then the night ends with her agreeing to go to this coffee date. And then as she's grabbing her coffee, she comments on how weird it is that two Hazels are working at the same place. So she calls them Hazel 1 and Hazel 2, which is relevant for later. So keep that in mind. And on the way out, she runs into Parker, who reveals that she also lives in her apartment now too, for some reason. And then on the way up, she finds Joe is helping this drunk woman into her apartment, and she assumes that, oh, that's the second time he's come out of somebody's apartment on this floor. He might be or something like that. And then when she tells Dr. Nicole the next day, she's like, don't assume that kind of stuff. That's called confirmation bias. It means that we tend to think what we're going to think. So basically, if we assume something is true, then we're just going to continue thinking something is true, blah, blah, blah. So it's finally the day of the coffee date with Dr. Addison. And as Sadie's anxiously waiting there, she gets a text from the clinic saying, oh, Dr. Addison had an emergency. He couldn't leave, so he basically stood her up. And then as she's walking out, she decides to leave. She runs into Parker again, and then she just makes fun of her and says, oh yeah, by the way, I like Joe. So she assumes for some reason that Sadie has Joe's number. So she tries to grab her phone, and then as Sadie and them are going back and forth, Parker bumps into this lady behind her and then spilling her coffee all over her. So she just kind of walks away after that. Parker does a lot of that after she's just done tormenting Sadie, but Sadie is there like, oh my god, are you okay? Let's switch clothes, because the lady had to go to the airport to meet her boyfriend, so you're not a mess, because I could just change, so my apartment is up there. So yeah, they switch clothes, they leave, and she's like, it's really good to be good to people or whatever. And then on the way out, Sadie runs into Joe again, and she just decides to go to her apartment just to clean up or whatever. But then they go on to the rooftop, and Sue decides to throw a surprise party for Sadie. But Sue often forgets that Sadie has prosopagnosia, so feeling all these strangers around her, she starts to get a panic attack. And then Joe finds her just like curled up and hyperventilating in the corner, so he decides to just stay with her until she calms down. She asks him, oh, how do you know that? He mentions that he has a friend that gets panic attacks, and she said he's basically petting like I was a dog, just foreshadowing for later. So another thing to keep in mind, this heart-to-heart reveal that Joe reveals he was married once, and I don't know if they divorced or I think his wife just left after cheating on him with some other dude. After they talked for a bit in this corner, okay, I'm kind of hungry, you want to get pizza or something? And Joe was just like, oh yeah, I'm on it, I got some already. And after they finished eating, Sadie reveals that it's her mom's birthday today, and she usually likes to just watch old movies, make a cake. But instead, Joe takes her to this little bakery. They just eat there and converse a little bit. This makes her realize, oh, maybe Joe isn't as bad as I thought he was. But she does feel a little resentful toward Dr. Addison standing her up, and she kind of feels like, oh, is this cheating if I'm just hanging out with this other guy, even though we haven't established it? So she just has this kind of back and forth in her head about Dr. Addison and Joe for the rest of the night. So the next day, Sadie takes Peanut out for a walk, and it starts raining, so they come back sopping wet and run into Parker and Joe in the elevator. Parker pretends to faint, and Joe decides to carry her back to her apartment. Meanwhile, Sadie tries to go to her apartment, but then she realizes her deadbolt is stuck, so she's just sitting there sopping wet on the floor. And then when Joe finally comes back out again of Parker's apartment, he was just like, "What are you doing down there? Let me just come into my apartment and I'll help you." When she goes in there, she realizes his apartment is like big and empty, and she's like, "Oh, why is it like that?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I sold my furniture after my wife left me, so kind of just living the Hobbit type life or whatever." Conversation eventually leads them back to talking about Joe asking Sadie what the heck is Parker's deal with her. And she says, "The girl she bullied was this sweet girl named Augusta Ross. We'd been friends since we were little. Parker left menacing typed anonymous notes in her locker every morning. Stacks of them. She told Augusta that she was ugly. Detail about what was wrong with every feature on her face and every part of her body. She made up lies about how much individual people hated Augusta and fabricated terrible things they supposedly said about her. She was relentless. And here's the clincher. She told Augusta if she ever told anybody about the notes, she would poison her cat Cupcake. And then she printed off pictures of cats and cut their eyes out and started leaving those notes in Augusta's locker too." She keeps going. It says, "I went on. Her bullying got so bad and she was relentless for so long that Augusta one night tried to swallow a whole bottle of Tylenol, which really will kill you, by the way. Luckily, she was terrible at taking pills. When her parents walked in on her in front of a giant pile of capsules, the whole story came tumbling down. The school got involved, an investigation happened, and Parker, who had apparently been typing those notes in a hidden file on my laptop, went to the administration and handed it over." "You got blamed," Joe said, astonished. "I got kicked out," I said. "They sent me away after that, to a thing they called boarding school, but it had distinct correctional facility vibes." "Nobody stood up for you? Nobody helped you?" "Everybody sided with Parker, including my father." "How could he do that?" I shrugged. "He said the evidence was incontrovertible." "She sounds like a psychopath." I nodded. "She basically stole my life. By the end of high school, she was living in my room, wearing my clothes, hanging with my friends, and sleeping with the boyfriend who dumped me after the scandal. But the worst part was Peanut. I couldn't take him with me. He had to spend 2 years living with those monsters. The day after I graduated, I made Lucinda bring him out to me on the front walk, and I never looked back." "And now she's moved into our building?" "Yep. Not by accident, I'm guessing." "Agreed. But why?" "I don't really know," I said. "Well, it's not because she suddenly changed her entire personality. I can promise you that." "Do you think she's here to mess with you?" "I guarantee it. But why?" "You know those children who try to trap ground squirrels so they can torture them?" "I guess so." "That's her. And I'm the ground squirrel." Anyway, now she set her sights on you, so be warned. So, Parker is actually insane. So yeah, she said, "Oh, she likes you." And he's like, "Oh, okay." She was like, "Don't fall for her shenanigans." He's like, "I won't because she's not my type," or whatever. And it's like, that's supposed to be cute, but it's kind of like, oh, whatever. After talking for a bit, Mr. Kim, who is her landlord, decides to come by and fix her deadbolt so she could go home. As she's just entering her apartment, she gets a call from Sue, basically saying, "Oh, yeah, I eloped with my boyfriend, by the way. We're gonna go on a sleep train to Canada or whatever." And then she's just like, "What? You agreed to be my model?" And then she is just like, "Yeah, I know, but she said I should have called sooner, but it was all so dramatic. He kidnapped me. Isn't that cute?" And I'm just like, "What? You're fake friend. You're such a fake friend, Sue." And she's just like, and the way she said it, she's like, it doesn't sound like she even felt that bad about her suddenly up and leaving, you know? And then this causes Sadie, of course, to start panicking. She was like, "My show is only like a couple of weeks away. What am I gonna do?" And then Joe just overhears and you're like, "Hey, I heard you need a model, so why don't I be your model?" And then she's like, "Okay, fine." So then she starts painting him. It's not working out. So they decide to just take a break and go walk in the park or whatever. And then as they're just chilling on the grass, Joe's ex-wife, Skylar, just happens to be walking up with her new partner on the sidewalk. And then Sadie just goes all in, pretends to be his girlfriend, wife, or whatever, by like nuzzling up to him, and then eventually she just kisses him until Joe's ex-wife just leaves out of disgust. And then after the kiss, she also, in the back of her head, she still feels bad for Dr. Addison. So that's how the night ends. The next morning isn't working out for Sadie. She's just like stubbing her toe and shit. She's getting cursed out on the street. The kicker is that she finds Joe leaving Parker's apartment in his PJs, and she's just like, "Oh man, after we kissed, after we just made out on the grass, that meant nothing to you?" Just like internally, she's just spiraling until she's just like, "Okay, I'm just gonna go downstairs and get a coffee or whatever." But then, surprise, surprise, Parker comes to torment her again. And she just to tell her, she's like, oh yeah, I'm coming to your art show no matter what you say. And Sadie just gets so upset. She finally asks, why? Can't you just leave me the hell alone? And there it was. She got me in the end, as always. And now her work was done. I don't know, she said with a cheerful shrug before turning to walk away. It's just so fun to watch you fall apart. Which, yep, Parker is just like certifiably insane. There's just something. I don't know what's wrong with her. She just likes fucking with her for no reason. Sadie just snaps and then slams the glass door of the coffee shop. I don't know how strong someone has to be to slam a glass door and for it to shatter, but it does. And then Hazel 1 comes up to clean it, but then she realizes that when Hazel 1 puts her hair up, she's like two different people. But she's just like, oh my god, there was never a Hazel 1 and Hazel 2. It was only just a Hazel. I think that's a common thing in prosopagnosia also. It's like if somebody just changes one little thing about themselves, it could look like an entirely different person. So then, of course, who to find her when she's falling apart but Joe. But then Sadie remembers that Joe came out of Parker's apartment, so she's like, you know what, I'm just gonna go home. I'm gonna cancel this whole portrait thing. It's useless anyway. But then Sue calls her up. She's like, oh yeah, hey, I read about this person also with prosopagnosia who just, instead of painting what they should see, what I could feel from touching my subject. Sadie decides to give it another go and apologize to Joe. They finally kind of clear up this misunderstanding with her. She's like, oh, hey, listen, I've been having a rough month, okay? But she doesn't tell him she has prosopagnosia. She tells him, I just had brain surgery, so it's a tough month. And then Sadie asks, oh, yeah, Joe, why did you come out of Parker's apartment? Like, what the heck is up with that? And you're like, oh, yeah, pet sitting her cat. So it's not that big of a deal. So then she decides to give this last-ditch effort a try with Joe. And she's kind of shy to touch him, but then she gets to the groove of it. And she asks him again why he and another tenant, the drunk lady that he was with that one night, like why he keeps going in and out of people's apartments and just helping them. Because she assumes they're hooking up and that he has a girlfriend. He reveals that he's basically the floor's pet sitter. The woman he was talking about in the elevator when we were first introduced to him was actually just a big bulldog that he was babysitting. And then Sadie's like, oh my god, I can't believe I misunderstood this whole time. I thought you were like a playboy or something like that. But then Joe is just like, oh yeah, I don't like anyone in this complex except for one person. And Sadie, like done, she's like, oh, who? He's just like, oh yeah, you stupid. And they eventually just like start making out or whatever. But then Lucinda comes in and kind of cockblocks them before they could actually do anything. So then the night ends with her just reluctantly inviting Lucinda in. I'm doing something! Lucinda's basically there to say, oh yeah, me, Parker, and your dad are coming to your art show. And no surprise, Sadie refuses. Until Lucinda pulls out a bag, and then in the bag is her mother's dress that Sadie was wearing on the day she went to the hospital after she had her seizure in the street. That Sadie is just like, oh, maybe she's not so bad after all. Like, what? Like, yeah, if anything, she's an overbearing stepmother and kind of a dunce. But at the same time, like, Sadie's just like going on and on in this book about every time she bumps into Lucinda, she's like, oh, she's so annoying. She's so emotionally manipulative. But there were no signs whatsoever of Lucinda actually demonstrating this kind of behavior in the present. Maybe in the past, I'm not so sure. Like, the only kind of bitchy thing she did is like when Sadie realized her dress was thrown away in the hospital, she was like, oh yeah, it's just a dress. It's no big deal. But we haven't seen any signs of Lucinda being manipulative in any way. She's just kind of there. I'm not sure about why Sadie just hates her so much. So the next morning, she finally decides that after her night with Joe, she wants to call off the thing that she may have had with Dr. Addison. So she goes over to his clinic, pulls him aside, and tells him, oh yeah, hey, can we keep our thing professional? Well, it's been a bit of a crazy time for me lately. And actually, you know, not on purpose, of course, but kind of by accident, I guess you could say I developed a thing for someone else. Dr. Addison stood there for a second. Then he said, a thing? You developed a thing for someone else? Wasn't that what I just said? Yeah, you know, so when? Recently? Who is it? He asked again, sounding brittle. Oh, just a guy, you know. A guy I spent a lot of time with lately. Which, if you said his name, maybe that would have cleared things up sooner. But we'll get to that. It's not revealed yet. I'm sorry, I said. It just kind of happened. I wasn't even really sure that you were interested anyway. You weren't sure I was interested? I mean, were you? Yes, he said, his voice sour. I was interested. Wow, that's not the reaction I expect from a guy who stood me up and never called. Dr. Addison adjusted his tie. So, you're going to date this other person? I think so. And he went on studying the ground like he was trying to solve a problem. If I told you that I really liked you a lot, would that make a difference? I wasn't sure what to say. If I told you, he went on, that I can't remember the last time I met someone who woke me up like you do, that there's something about you that I can't get out of my head, that I keep thinking about you and wondering if you might be really right for each other. He looked up. What would you say? I'd say, don't stand me up next time? I thought to myself. But to Dr. Addison, I just said, I'm so sorry. I think it's too late. And then maybe out of politeness, or maybe just because it's not every day that someone saw something so valuable in me, I added, thank you though, for feeling those feelings. And then he just walks away saying, oh, good luck to you, reluctantly. Confusingly, it seems like they had something, but I'm glad that she decides to push forward, and instead of keeping two guys on one hook, she just decides to push forward and say what she has to say. So I guess I kind of respect her for that, but at the same time, the reader is supposed to be confused as to why he is so madly in love with her when they didn't even date. And then even though she's feeling good about herself for finally breaking it off with Dr. Addison, even though they never really had a thing, she goes back to her apartment and finishes Joe's portrait, and she texts him, calls him, hey, your portrait's done, you can look at it now. But the suspicious thing is he doesn't answer all day, so she calls up Sue and she's like, oh yeah, he's not answering and shit. And then Sue's just like, oh, maybe he was just using you for the chase. Assuming a lot of things about him before even trying to knock on his door. And even when they do, he doesn't answer. So she's kind of just like, okay, that's weird. I thought we had something. So she just stews for the rest of the night. The next day, she's at her doctor appointment again with Dr. Nicole. And they tell her, the good news is your swelling went down and you may start to see some familiar faces if you're lucky in a couple of days. And then that's when Sadie kind of basically treats this also as a therapy session. She breaks down and says, my life is a shit show. This right here felt like the lowest moments of my life. I thought I was supposed to be getting better, not getting worse. Learning to cope, at least. What the hell is going on? Tell me what has you feeling down, Dr. Nicole asked. Everything? I asked. Sure, everything. Okay, she asked for it. I still can't see faces. I submitted a portrait to this competition that I should have won, handedly. That's guaranteed to come in dead last. I'm being menaced by my evil stepsister. I'm embarrassed to go back to my favorite coffee shop. My best friend eloped to Canada and left me dateless for what's sure to be the most humiliating event of my life. My stepmother wants to build a relationship with me and she's coming to the show over my objections. My dog is 1,000 years old. I broke up with my fantasy fiance, and the very cute guy in my building whom I might genuinely be in love with kissed me senseless the other night and then fully disappeared.
What's that? Jesse and Prospector are trapped in the old abandoned mine, and Prospector just lit a stick of dynamite thinking it was a candle, and now they're about to be blown to smithereens?
Which one is the worst? All of them, I answered. Then I had an idea. Any chance you could be my date to the art show, so I don't have to go alone? And then Dr. Nicole says, I had to respect this bitch for this one, but she didn't budge. I find our work goes better in here, she said, when we don't see each other in public. She's just like, okay, I heard all your problems. I can't handle you right now. This is strictly professional. I'm not your friend. I'm just here to get paid. Get out, please. And it's just like, yes, I have to respect you, Dr. Nicole. You know what's up. You have to do what you gotta do. Get paid. So after walking around a little bit, wallowing in her pity, she finally runs into Joe. But when she sees him, he appears very stoic and closed off. And then she's like, oh, hey, do you want to see the portrait? He's basically very distant and standoffish. He finally tells her he's leaving town, and she's like, oh, but why? You agreed to be my date and whatever. And she's like, but I'm too scared to be alone. I can't be alone in this. I'll be humiliated and stuff like that. I need someone. And Joe basically says, well, tough. I'm leaving. So he goes, and she's just left alone on the street. At this point, I don't know if it's obvious to you. I already thought that Joe and Dr. Addison are one and the same, but it's pretty obvious that something happened between her breaking up with Dr. Addison and now for him to be like this. But this wouldn't have happened if 1, you told the doctor the guy you're dating is Joe, and 2, you told Joe that you had prosopagnosia. And maybe this would have cleared up a while ago, but this is the third act conflict right here, so just strap in because it's just gonna get crazier from here. And finally, the day of the art show comes. And Sadie's artwork is placed way in the back, by the back rooms, by a droopy AC or whatever. So nobody's going over there to visit her unless they need to go to the bathroom. And she's just standing there alone, just kind of nervous and stuff. Until she has a bathroom break. And then finally the judges come by. And they basically roast her art. It says, did the artist leave? Wouldn't you? I never would have shown up at all. She must have fled. Right, off to not quit her day job, or to fling herself off a bridge. They snickered at that. It's just so bizarre. One went on pensively. The body and background are so exquisite. But then you get to the face. It looks like a wolf face in a way. Impossible. Animals are against the rules. Whatever it is, it's like the face melted, or got hit with a pie right before sitting. I just don't understand how this piece is even here. Maybe they notified the wrong artist? It's just insulting, more than anything. Kinda makes me angry. What a waste of a top 10 spot. Too bad we can't give negative points, isn't it? It's just like, why did they sound like a bunch of gossiping teenage girls? Do art judges actually sound like that? It just seems really, not only rude, but it's just like very immature for North American portrait society. And then you have judges like that. It just kind of seems weird to me. But anyway, she leaves the bathroom and she's like, you know what? I'm not going to let them beat me down. I'm going to keep my hopes up. But then just as she has her hopes up, who else to come by but Parker? Then, as usual, Parker comes by and she's like, haha, your artwork is so fucked, your dress is ugly, you shouldn't even be here. And finally, Sadie snaps again. She asked her, she's like, why are you so mean to me? And Parker says, it's not my fault your mother died, Parker said then. It's not my fault your dad married my mom. It's not my fault we sold our house and I gave up my room, and we got thrown together every minute of every day. I didn't ask for that, and I certainly didn't ask for you. I was not consulted about any of it. And yes, I did all those terrible things. I framed you and lied about you and coaxed them both into pushing you away. But your dad not loving you, that's not my fault either. He stopped loving you well before we met. You lost him all on your own. And you want to know how you did that? Because you, and here she seemed to rise up on her dragon haunches, are the reason that your mother died. Okay. Before we get into the mother died stuff, I want to talk about Parker. So you're telling me she's a bitch to her because all these years, she's mad that her mommy decided to marry another man and she didn't have a say in any of it? Like a fucking teenager throwing a tantrum? Like, Parker, grow the this is your main reason for hating her? This is some Disney Channel stuff, okay, Parker? And to get into the reason why Sadie is the reason her mom died is apparently Sadie and her mom planned to have this spring break trip away from home. And even though her father insisted that, remember her mother had the same condition that Sadie has, her thing was leaking, but her mom didn't remove it, so she died. So even though her dad assisted, her mom was just like, no, I'll do it later. But it was too late before she even got to it. Apparently that's how her mom died. But then Parker blames Sadie just to get under her skin a lot more. And then as Sadie's looking for an escape, her father and Lucinda also show up at the venue at the same time. So the reason why they were a little later than Parker was that apparently Parker texted Lucinda saying, oh yeah, hey, the show was canceled. But then Lucinda was like, oh no, we'll go see for ourselves. And of course it wasn't canceled. Kind of set off Sadie. She said she lied to you because she wants you to stand me up. And it says, Lucinda's utter incomprehension at this idea made me want to light myself on fire. She shook her head. I think but I couldn't bear to listen to her explain. I cut her off. She lied to you because she always lies to you. She lied to you because she wanted us to hate each other. She lied to you because it's fun for her. Because she delights in messing with people. Because you let her. You never question her. You never challenge her. You never use any kind of critical thinking. Even when her facts don't add up. Even when nothing makes sense. She's making up a story of this family. And it's not even a good one. But you just believe it. Every damn time. And then Lucinda's just constantly defending Parker. Defending her. And again, annoying. But not emotionally... I don't know if you would categorize that as emotionally manipulative, but I guess that's what Lucinda and her dad siding with Parker over and over, and Sadie's just over it. But then as Sadie, she feels like she's backed into a corner, who to show up but Augusta Ross. If you can recall, it was her friend in high school that Parker bullied. So she, but homegirl here just walks up and says that, oh, Sadie wasn't the one who bullied me. It was Parker. So Augusta's there because she's just like her family moved back there or whatever. And Augusta says, but Sadie, as I believe she was just telling you, is not the person who bullied me. The person who bullied me was Parker. Parker? Lucinda said, as if Augusta had just said Taylor Swift. Oh yeah, Augusta went on. That whole year, she left notes in my locker. She picked on my clothes. She told me I was ugly, and no one would ever love me, and I should just give up. Daily, hourly, sometimes. Oh boy, she was vicious. Sadie was always super nice, Augusta said, nodding at me approvingly. In fact, she's still nice. Then Augusta walked closer to me and handed over a little bundle. Here's your dress back. I looked down. My dress? Your ruffle dress, she said just as I saw the polka dot fabric. I put it together. You're the coffee girl? That was you? You didn't recognize me that day, Augusta said. I've changed a lot, hadn't we all? But I recognized you, she went on. I was just coming over to say hi when Parker knocked me down, and then you were helping me up and giving me your dress. Sweet as ever. I thought about saying something then, but I was so late. I googled you later to find a way to bring you your dress back, and I saw the notice about the art show. Did you make it to the airport? I asked. Augusta nodded and held up a sparkling engagement ring. I did. Then she turned back to my dad and Lucinda. I was going to write you a letter to set things straight, and I really just came here tonight to say hi to Sadie and support her show. But then I wound up eavesdropping, and I couldn't resist jumping in. Augusta turned back to me. Parker framed you for it, huh? I nodded. They kicked me out of school. I'm so sorry, Augusta said. I had no idea. After we left, my parents shielded me from every single thing related to this place. Understandably. Anyway, Augusta said, turning back with false brightness to the slack-jawed pair of my father and Lucinda. I couldn't help but overhear Sadie saying that you never believed her. But here's a little pro tip for somebody who knows both of your daughters pretty well. If you had a choice between Parker and Sadie, pick Sadie every time. I'm just... Okay, plot magic. Why? Augusta, homegirl just walks up to them and says, listen, Sadie wasn't the one who bullied me all those years. It was Parker. Like, literally, this is doing the same vibes as Humpty Dumpty was pushed off by Woody from Toy Story. Oh my god, I was just losing my mind. Okay, so it keeps going. It keeps getting worse. So, after that whole monologue Augusta had, they all turned to confront Parker about her actions. But it turns out, she ran away. She just left. As she was, as she was talking, she just left the venue. And, Lucinda is just, faint. She's like, oh my god, I can't believe this happened. So, her dad's just like, okay, I gotta go get the car real quick. So, he's just getting the car. Lucinda's just kind of feeling faint, just sitting down. And Augusta, she's just like, okay, I said my piece, bye. And she just left. She's just magically there and then magically gone, as if she never existed. But anyway, before they left, Sadie and her dad have a little heart-to-heart about her mom. He basically tells her that I blame my grief for not being able to share this info with you about how your mother died and whatnot. And he's like, oh yeah, I blamed you for a while, but I don't anymore. And they were just they gave each other a little pad, went on their way, and okay, you're healing, I guess that's hooray. They left. Sadie just checks her watch. She's just how long is there? And there's 45 minutes left. She's like, fuck it, I'm going home. I'm leaving early. But then before she left, she sees somebody in the shadows of the building. Guess who it is? It's Parker. But she doesn't say anything. So Sadie comes up to her. Parker still doesn't say anything. She's just kind of saying, I don't know if she's looking at her or anything. It's not really clear. She's just in the shadows. Sadie comes up to her. And she goes on this whole spiel. She says, I don't know what drives you to go after me like you do. I once read that people who hurt others think there are only two choices in the world. To hurt or be hurt. And so they hurt others so they can feel safe. If they're the bully, they can't be bullied. If they're the victimizer, they can't be the victim. As if anything in life could ever be that simple. But maybe that's what it is for you. Maybe it's faulty logic. Maybe it's something you'll overthink in the future and regret. Or maybe there's, I don't know, maybe something wrong with your brain. And this is how it'll always be. Me, always cast as a squirrel, and you, always cast as a neighborhood pyromaniac who douses a squirrel with lighter fluid. I paused then in case she might have something to say. She didn't. What in the Disney Channel is going on here? You were just in there screaming about her for ruining your life, your whole entire life, for years. And she continues to do that. And yet you turn around and say, maybe she can be redeemed. Where is the logic in that? I get if you're having this conversation in an epilogue a few years later, but you just came out of the venue that you were just saying, oh yeah, she ruined everything. And then you're like, maybe I'm willing to forgive you if you're willing to forgive yourself, basically. Oh my god. So yeah, after she says that, she just leaves the venue. She's like, okay, I'm gone. I said my piece. And by the time she gets back to her apartment, she's like, you know what? I'm gonna try leaving Joe one last voicemail. Just explaining everything, her brain surgery and her prostatectomy and all that. And just asking again why he's distant. But that's how her night ends. And the next morning, Sue finally comes back from her freaking Canada train trip or whatever and tells her they have a plan for an elopement party on the rooftop of the complex. That same day, Sadie receives a couple letters. One from the Portrait Society saying, oh yeah, surprise, surprise, your portrait didn't win. It was ugly. It was like last place or whatever. But fortunately, Mr. Kim, her landlord, bought it, so just win for that, I guess. The second letter she got was her dad saying, oh yeah, hey, here's an old portrait your mom made of you. And then as she's staring at it, she realizes that she could actually see the face as a whole rather than bits and pieces kind of like floating around on someone's face. And she's like, oh my god, I could see faces again. A whole revelation thing. But in the next chapter, it turns out she can't see all faces, just those familiar to her. But she's just like, hey, you know what? It's a win. But then later on during the party, she realizes, oh wait, I can't see all the faces. I can only see those familiar to me. But she's just like, you know what? Hey, I'll take it as a win. And everything's fine and dandy until Joe appears at the doorway. So then she's like, oh snap, I gotta hide. And she's basically trying to ignore him throughout the party until he goes away. But of course he doesn't go away. Eventually, he decides to confront her in private. And he's just like, oh hey, can you see me? And she's like, oh yeah, I can. Fast forward, he's just like, oh yeah, why did you break up with me? She said, I didn't break up with you. You told me you liked someone else. I did like someone else, briefly. And by like, I mean I briefly decided I had a desperate crush on my veterinarian. But Joe was shaking his head. Your veterinarian? Yes, okay, my dashing veterinarian. Who? Who? Are you like going to give him trouble or something? It doesn't matter. Who? Joe demanded. I blinked for a second. He saved Peanut from me. He brought him back from death's door. His name is Dr. And then in unison, we both said, Oliver Addison. I frowned. You know him? But Joe had already slapped his forehead and spun around to start pacing the roof. Oliver Addison. You dumped me for your veterinarian. Oliver Addison? Sounds like you do know him. You broke up with Dr. Oliver Addison. I nodded. At his vet clinic. During a workday. Out in the side yard. I nodded. How did he know this? Were they friends? And you told him that you liked someone else? Another nod from me. Was that someone else that you liked? Even as he was saying it, he was shaking his head. Me? I sighed. Was he really going to make me say it? I met Joe's eyes. Yes, obviously. Of course it was you. Joe let go of my shoulders and dropped his head and gestured like, unbelievable. She was just like, oh yeah, we never even dated or whatever. He just found me when he stood me up that night at the coffee shop. And she was just like, oh yeah, I felt something special with you. You ditched me for no reason. And then Joe says, Sadie, the person you dumped was me. Hadn't we been over this? I'm telling you, I didn't dump you. Sadie, Joe says again, waiting this time until he had my full attention. I am Dr. Oliver Addison. And she's like, you're Joe, he says. I'm not Joe. You've been calling me Joe for weeks, but that's not really my name. My name, he said again for posterity, is Dr. Oliver Addison. I'm sorry, wait, are you Joe or Dr. Addison? I am both. Those two people are the same guy. Hold on, you're saying you're the guy who lives downstairs? The guy who fed me dinner at this place when I got locked out? And talked me through a panic attack during a party and kissed me senseless not that long ago? That guy's the same person as the guy at the vet clinic who rescued Peanut? The same guy. You are both Joe and Dr. Addison? He nodded. How is that possible that you're only one person? How is it possible that you thought I was two people? But Joe has glasses and floppy hair. I reminded with my hand the way Joe's hair flopped over his forehead, even while suddenly noticed that the Joe I was talking to was not wearing glasses and did not have floppy hair. In fact, he had Dr. Addison's hair. And Dr. Addison has, I reached up to touch it, this hair. No glasses at work, just contacts. But they make my eyes tired, so I take them out before I go home. And you slick your hair back for work, but you don't bother with it at home? It doesn't stay neat very long. Sadie just keeps being confused, like, wait, but you look like this, and you talk like that, and he's just like, oh yeah, that's my doctor voice, I look like this because I want to be respected, and at home I can just however I want, so I just dress like that. Oh yeah, and the reason why she calls him Joe is that apparently his bowler jacket that he wears when he's Joe has the name Joe on it for some reason. He never clarified her that his name's actually Oliver, because he thought it was funny or something. And apparently he's also the good Samaritan in the beginning that paid for her wine and rescued her from her seizure in the middle of the street. Long story short, after all that was cleared up, they're together and they go up to Sue, have to explain it all again, yada yada. And yeah, they're basically living happily ever after. The story ends with an epilogue. 1 year later, Sadie and Joe / Dr. Addison are living in his apartment building in the same complex. And then it ends with her just internally thinking about Parker and her whereabouts, because Mr. Kim just kicked her out basically because he didn't like her. She goes on this whole spiel about, oh yeah, life is about hope, life is about humanity and whatnot, just like all these. If my middle school self was reading this, then she would chew it up so bad. But reading this now, knowing the self-help kind of talk, kind of really in your face, about how the author's ideologies, like, it's not bad ideologies, it's just really, ooh, be kind, have hope, whatnot, that kind of talk. And that's how the book ends. So thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, all that jazz, and I'll see you when I see you. Take care, chickadees.